Wyoming Territory, 1886. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten, casting the rugged mountains in purple shadow as Catherine Hayes tightened the cinch on her mare. Her hands trembled as she secured the last of her belongings to the saddle. 23 years old and alone on the frontier, she had learned one truth above all others. Attachment meant pain, and the Wyoming Territory had no mercy for fools who opened their hearts. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a practical braid, wisps escaping to frame a face that carried both beauty and determination in equal measure. The simple blue calico dress she wore beneath her riding coat had seen better days, but practicality mattered more than fashion when you were planning to disappear before sunrise. The small ranch house behind her stood silent. Inside, folded neatly on the kitchen table, lay the note she'd spent half the night writing. 5 months she'd been here, working for the aging widower who'd taken pity on her when she'd arrived in Laramie with nothing but determination and a talent for cooking. 5 months of peace before the past came hunting. 5 months of building something that felt dangerously like hope, and then there was Matthew Quentin. Catherine secured the final saddlebag with a decisive tug. Matthew complicated everything with his easy smile and gentle ways. At 26, he was the most respected young rancher in the valley, having built the neighboring spread through nothing but grit and honest work. Unlike the other cowboys who swaggered through town, Matthew carried himself with quiet confidence. No swagger, no boasting, just capable hands and eyes that seemed to see right through her careful defenses. "Foolishness," she whispered to her mare, patting the animal's neck. "Getting attached out here only ends one way." She had nearly mounted when she heard the crunch of boots on the gravel drive. Her heart seized. Turning slowly, she found herself face to face with the very man she'd been hoping to avoid. Matthew stood 10 paces away, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the pre-dawn light. His Stetson was pushed back on his head, revealing sandy brown hair and a face that combined youthful handsomeness with the weathered look of a man who worked outdoors. A light stubble shadowed his jaw, and his blue eyes, usually warm with good humor, now held confusion and something deeper, something that made Catherine's chest ache. In his hand was her goodbye note. "Going somewhere, Catherine." His voice was soft, but it carried in the still morning air. The stillness between them stretched taut as a wire. In his other hand he held something else, a telegram. Her breath caught. She knew without asking what it contained. "They found me," she said simply. Matthew took a step closer. "You want to tell me who they are and why you're running instead of talking to me?" Catherine's hand tightened on the reins. "There's nothing to discuss. I've brought trouble to your door, and I won't have innocent people paying for my mistakes." "Funny thing about that," Matthew said, his tone deceptively casual as he glanced down at her note. "Your letter here says you're leaving because you got a better position up in Montana Territory. Doesn't mention trouble at all." Heat rushed to Catherine's cheeks. "Would you have let me go if I'd told the truth?" "I reckon I'd at least have wanted to know what that truth was." He moved closer, careful, like he was approaching a spooked horse. "Catherine, whatever you're running from, you don't have to face it alone." The first golden rays of sunlight spilled over the eastern ridge, illuminating them both. Catherine felt exposed, transparent. How could she explain what she'd done? The choices that had led her here, fleeing across half the country. "Trust gets you killed out here," she said, the words bitter on her tongue. "I've seen what happens to people who think differently." Matthew held up the telegram. "This came for old man Jenkins last night. Says there's men looking for a woman matching your description. Says she stole something valuable back east." Catherine flinched. "I didn't steal anything that wasn't already mine." "Then why run?" "Because they won't see it that way." She squared her shoulders. "The law doesn't favor women alone, Matthew. Especially not when powerful men want something from them." Matthew stepped forward, close enough now that she could see the concern etched in his features. "Let me help you." "Why would you risk yourself for someone you barely know?" His expression softened. "I know enough. I know you work harder than anyone on Jenkins' place. I know you sit with him and read the newspaper every night because his eyes are failing. I know you make the best apple pie in 3 counties and can calm a frightened horse with just your voice." He paused. And I know that when you think no one's looking, there's a sadness in you that makes me want to fix whatever's causing it." Catherine's throat tightened. In another life, words like these might have mattered, might have been enough to make her stay. But not now, not with what was coming. "I have to go," she whispered. Matthew reached for her hand. "At least tell me what you're running from, let me understand." The touch of his calloused fingers against hers broke something inside Catherine. The story spilled out, how her father had died leaving gambling debts to Maxwell Pierce, the most powerful man in Boston. How Pierce had offered a bargain, marriage to his dissolute son in exchange for forgiveness of the debt. How she'd refused only to discover that her father's pocket watch, the only thing of value she had left, contained a hidden compartment with a small but exquisite diamond. "It was my mother's," she said, voice shaking. "Her father gave it to her before she left Ireland. Father must have hidden it during the worst times, saving it as a last resort. And Pierce claims it belongs to him," Matthew concluded, "as payment for the debt." Catherine nodded. "I took what was mine and fled. He's been hunting me since. 6 months of running, always looking over my shoulder." Her eyes met his. "Now do you understand why I have to leave? These men won't stop. They'll burn down anything in their path to get to me." Matthew was quiet for a long moment. The rising sun painted the landscape in gold and amber, warming the chill morning air. "My father always said that running just means you've got something chasing you," he finally said. "Sooner or later, you've got to turn and face it. Your father never met Maxwell Pierce." Matthew's mouth quirked up at one corner. "No, but he met plenty of men who thought their money made them gods. Found out they bled same as anybody when pushed too far." His expression grew serious. "The thing is, Catherine, I don't believe in coincidence. You ended up here in this valley at old Jenkins' place, right next to my ranch, for a reason." "The stagecoach broke down," she reminded him. "Jenkins needed help, that's all." "Maybe," Matthew conceded. "Or maybe it's because this is where you're meant to stand your ground." Dawn had fully broken now, painting the Wyoming landscape in breathtaking color. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully in verdant pastures. The mountains rose majestically against the sky. For a moment, Catherine allowed herself to imagine belonging to this place, to the community that had welcomed her without question, to the little room at Jenkins' house where she'd begun to feel safe. To the man standing before her, "They'll be here by week's end," she said, her voice small. "The telegram said they're already in Cheyenne." Matthew's gaze remained steady. "Then we have time to prepare." "Wait. You're not alone anymore, Catherine." He gestured toward the valley where smoke now rose from several chimneys. "This isn't Boston. Out here, we stand together." Something dangerous, hope perhaps, flickered in her chest. "I can't ask that of you, of anyone." "You didn't ask." "I'm offering." He hesitated, then added softly, "We all have our ghosts, Catherine. Mine taught me that the only way to survive out here is together." The statement hung between them, an invitation and a revelation all at once. For the first time, Catherine saw something vulnerable in Matthew's eyes, the shadow of his own painful past. "What happened to your family?" she asked. He looked away toward the distant mountains. "Smallpox took my mother and sisters when I was 12. Father and I survived, but he was never the same. Started drinking, got into debt with the wrong people." His jaw tightened. "One night he rode out alone to confront them. They brought his body back the next day." Understanding dawned. "So you built all this yourself?" Matthew nodded. "With help. Jenkins taught me ranching. Sheriff Wilcox made sure those men left town for good, Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house fed me till I could stand on my own 2 feet. His eyes found hers again. "That's how it works out here. We survive together or not at all." Catherine's hand trembled as she reached up to stroke her mare's neck, mind racing. Everything in her screamed to flee, to protect herself as she'd always done. But Matthew's words had taken root, challenging the belief she'd held so tightly, that she could only rely on herself. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked cautiously. "First, you come back inside and make some coffee while we talk to Jenkins. Then we ride into town and tell Sheriff Wilcox what's coming." He stepped closer, gently taking the reins from her hand. And then we figure out how to face these men on our terms, not theirs. The moment stretched between them, weighted with possibility. In Boston, Catherine had known precisely where she stood. A woman alone had few options and fewer protections. But here in the Wyoming Territory, the rules seemed different. The very harshness of frontier life had forged something unexpected. "Community, what if I'm not worth the trouble I'll bring?" she whispered, giving voice to her deepest fear. Matthew's expression softened. "Catherine Hayes, in the 5 months you've been here, you've brought nothing but good to this valley." Jenkins hasn't smiled so much since his wife passed. The children at the school love your stories. Even my foreman, Thompson, the surliest man in 3 territories, tips his hat when you pass. Despite everything, Catherine felt a smile tugging at her lips. "He's just being polite." "Thompson doesn't know the meaning of the word," Matthew countered, his own smile widening. "The point is, you belong here now, and we protect our own." The conviction in his voice stirred something deep within her, a longing to believe that perhaps, just this once, she didn't have to face her battles alone. Slowly, Catherine released her grip on the saddle. "One condition," she said firmly. "If it becomes clear we can't win this fight, you let me leave. I won't have blood on my hands." Matthew nodded solemnly, agreed. "But Catherine," his eyes held hers, "we're going to win." For the first time since receiving the telegram, Catherine felt something other than fear. It was fragile, tentative, but unmistakable. Hope. "Then I suppose I should put on some coffee," she said, attempting lightness. "We have plans to make." As they walked together toward the house, leading her still-saddled mare, Catherine couldn't help glancing back at the eastern horizon, where she had intended to be miles away by now. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, but for the first time in months she wasn't facing it alone. The next 4 days passed in a flurry of activity. Sheriff Wilcox had taken the news with grim seriousness, promising to stand with them when Pierce's men arrived. Jenkins, despite his 70 years and arthritic hands, had retrieved his old army rifle from the attic, determined to defend his home and his cook. Most surprising to Catherine was the response from the townsfolk. Word had spread quickly, as it always did in small communities, and instead of ostracizing her for bringing trouble, they had rallied. The blacksmith offered to stable her horse away from Jenkins' property, making it harder for anyone to steal it. The general store owner extended her credit until this unpleasantness is settled. Even the preacher's wife, a formidable woman with iron-gray hair and equally iron opinions, had stopped by with a pie and stern advice about standing one's ground against eastern bullies. But it was Matthew who truly astonished her. He had barely left her side, except to tend to his ranch duties. He escorted her to town, sat with her and Jenkins in the evenings, and somehow managed to make her laugh despite the growing tension. More than once she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. On the 4th night, as they sat on Jenkins' porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in crimson and gold, Matthew finally asked the question she'd been dreading. "The diamond," he said quietly, "where is it?" Catherine stiffened. "It's safe." "Catherine," his voice was gentle, "I'm not asking because I want it. I'm asking because if Pierce's men come searching, we need to make sure they don't find it." The wisdom of this was undeniable, yet Catherine hesitated. The small gem represented everything: her mother's memory, her father's final act of protection, her only security in an uncertain world. "It's sewn into the hem of my gray cloak," she admitted finally. "The one hanging in the back of the wardrobe upstairs." Matthew nodded thoughtfully. "We should move it. That's the first place they'll look." "And put it where? If they don't find it on me or in my belongings, they'll tear this house apart." "Exactly why it shouldn't be here at all." Matthew's eyes gleamed with something like mischief. "I have an idea, but you'll need to trust me." The word trust hung in the air between them. Catherine studied his face in the fading light, the earnest blue eyes, the honest set of his jaw, the quiet strength he carried without arrogance. In the short time she'd known him, Matthew Quentin had proven himself honorable in ways the so-called gentlemen of Boston society could never understand. "I do trust you," she said, surprised to discover she meant it. His smile in response warmed her more than any fire could have. The following morning they retrieved the diamond. It was smaller than Matthew had imagined, barely the size of his pinky fingernail, but it caught the light with extraordinary brilliance, reflecting all the colors of the sunrise. "My grandfather minded himself in the old country," Catherine explained as they stood in her small bedroom. "He gave it to my mother on her wedding day, told her it would always keep her safe." Her voice faltered. "She died when I was 8, consumption." Matthew's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Then we'll make sure it keeps her daughter safe too." They rode out together after breakfast, telling Jenkins they were checking on a creek that fed both properties. Instead, Matthew led her to a hidden canyon on his land, where a tiny cabin stood nestled against the rock face. "My first home," he explained as they dismounted. "Built it myself when I started the ranch." Not much to look at, but solid enough. The cabin was indeed small, a single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn furniture, and a narrow bed pushed against one wall. But it was clean and well-maintained, with dried herbs hanging from the rafters and a small shelf of books beside the bed. "You still use it?" Catherine asked, surprised by the lack of dust. Matthew nodded. "Sometimes during calving season, when I need to be on this side of the property, or when the main house feels too empty." He moved to the fireplace and knelt, working at something beneath the hearthstone. With a grunt of effort, he lifted the large flat stone to reveal a small cavity beneath. "My father's idea," he explained, "said every man needs a place for his secrets." He looked up at her. "I've never put anything in it before." Seemed I never had secrets worth hiding. Catherine approached slowly, the diamond clutched in her palm. "And now?" "Now I have something worth protecting." His eyes held hers steadily. "Someone worth protecting." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken emotion. Catherine knelt beside him, her skirts pooling around her, and carefully placed the diamond in the hiding spot. Matthew replaced the hearthstone, then hesitated, still kneeling close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Catherine," he began, his voice husky, "when this is over." The distant sound of a horse approaching cut him off. Both froze, exchanging alarmed glances. No one knew about this cabin except Matthew's ranch hands, and none would have reason to come here. "Stay inside," Matthew ordered, rising swiftly and drawing his revolver. "If there's trouble, there's a Winchester under the bed." Before she could protest, he was out the door, closing it firmly behind him. Catherine hesitated only a moment before moving to the window, parting the gingham curtain just enough to peer out. A rider was approaching, but it wasn't Pierce's men. It was Thompson, Matthew's foreman, his horse lathered with sweat from hard riding. "They're here, boss," she heard him call as Matthew stepped into view. 5 men rode into town an hour ago, asking questions about a woman with chestnut hair. "Sheriff Wilcox sent me to find you while he stalls them." Catherine's heart seemed to stop, then resume at double speed. They had arrived earlier than expected, were perhaps already at Jenkins' place, searching for her. She pushed through the door despite Matthew's instructions. "Is Jenkins safe?" Thompson's weathered face registered surprise at her appearance, but he recovered quickly. "Yes, ma'am. Doc Miller invited him to town for a chess game this morning." Sheriff made sure of it before the strangers arrived. "Smart," Matthew muttered. "What do we know about these men?" "City types but hard-looking," Thompson reported. "Leader's a tall fellow, well-dressed, silver at his temples. Name of Pierce, others look like hired guns." "Maxwell Pierce himself," Catherine breathed, fear coiling in her stomach. "I never thought he'd come personally." Matthew's expression hardened. "Changes nothing, the plan stands." He turned to Thompson. "Gather the men we discussed, quietly." As Thompson rode off, Matthew turned to Catherine. "This is happening faster than we expected. Are you ready?" She wanted to say yes, to match his steady confidence with her own. But the mention of Pierce, of his unexpected personal involvement, had shaken her more than she cared to admit. "He doesn't usually do his own dirty work," she said, voice trembling slightly. "If he's here himself, it means he's truly desperate to recover the diamond, or to make an example of me." Matthew stepped closer, his hands coming to rest gently on her shoulders. "Catherine, look at me." She raised her eyes to his. "You have two choices," he said firmly. "Run now, I'll give you my best horse and enough supplies to reach the next territory, or stand and finish this once and for all." "With you," she whispered, his eyes softened. "With me." "With all of us." The choice crystallized in that moment. She could spend her life running, always looking over her shoulder, never belonging anywhere. Or she could take a stand beside this man who had offered her something she'd never dared hope for, not just protection, but partnership. "I'm tired of running," she said, straightening her spine. "Let's finish this." Pride flickered in Matthew's eyes. He squeezed her shoulders once, then released her. "Then let's ride. We have a welcoming committee to arrange." They entered town separately. Matthew first, joining Sheriff Wilcox at the jail, and Catherine an hour later, walking calmly down the main street as if for routine shopping. The plan was simple but effective. Let Pierce see her, let him make his move, but ensure it happened on their terms, with witnesses and the law present. Catherine's heart hammered against her ribs as she entered the general store. Through the window she could see the hitching post outside the saloon across the street, where 5 horses she didn't recognize were tethered. Pierce and his men were inside, likely growing impatient. Mrs. Patterson, the storekeeper's wife, greeted her with a significant look. "Good afternoon, Miss Hayes, just the usual today." "Yes, please," Catherine replied, maintaining the charade. "And perhaps some of that blue ribbon you showed me last week." "Of course, dear, take your time looking around." Catherine pretended to examine fabric while watching the saloon entrance through the window. 10 minutes passed, 15. She began to wonder if she'd need to make her presence more obvious when the batwing doors finally swung open. Maxwell Pierce emerged first, tall and imposing in his expensive Eastern suit. His silver-streaked hair and patrician features belied the coldness of his eyes that swept the street until they landed unerringly on the general store window. On her. Even across the distance, Catherine could see the smile that spread across his face, not one of pleasure, but of a predator sighting prey. 4 men followed him out, rougher looking than their employer but equally purposeful in their movements. "They're coming," Mrs. Patterson murmured, moving to the doorway. "Sheriff's watching from the jail. Mr. Quentin and the others are in position." Catherine nodded, drawing a deep breath to steady herself. Everything hinged on what happened next, on Pierce making his move publicly, on Sheriff Wilcox witnessing the confrontation, on the townsfolk who had positioned themselves strategically around the main street. The bell above the door jingled as Pierce entered, ducking his head slightly to clear the frame. Up close, he looked older than Catherine remembered, the lines around his mouth deeper, the silver in his hair more pronounced. But the cold calculation in his eyes remained unchanged. "Miss Hayes," he said, his Boston accent pronounced after weeks of Western drawls. "What an extraordinary coincidence." Catherine lifted her chin. "Mr. Pierce. I wish I could say it's a pleasure." His smile tightened. "I've gone to considerable expense and trouble to find you, young lady. I believe you have something that belongs to me." Mrs. Patterson moved closer, her presence a silent support. Other customers, the blacksmith's wife, the banker, the young schoolteacher, watched with cautious attention. "I have nothing of yours," Catherine replied steadily. "The diamond was my mother's, left to me by my father. The debt died with him." Pierce's facade of civility slipped just briefly. "That is not for you to decide. Your father borrowed extensively from me, secured against his assets." "All his assets?" "My mother's heirloom was never his to offer as collateral." "The courts would disagree." Pierce stepped closer. "Now I've been patient, Miss Hayes. I've followed you across half the country. My patience is at an end." His voice hardened. "You will give me the diamond or you will face the consequences." "Is that a threat, Mr. Pierce?" The new voice came from the doorway, where Sheriff Wilcox now stood, thumbs hooked in his belt near his holster. Pierce turned smoothly. "Simply a statement of fact, Sheriff. This young woman has stolen property belonging to me. I've come to recover it." "Interesting." The sheriff stepped inside. because I received a telegram from Boston just yesterday. Seems there's no record of any formal charges against Miss Hayes, no theft report. No legal claim filed for this alleged diamond. Pierce's expression darkened. My business affairs are private matters. Not when you bring them to my town, they ain't. Wilcox's weathered face remained impassive. Now, if you've got papers proving your claim, I'd be happy to review them. Otherwise, you're just a man making threats against one of our citizens. The storekeeper emerged from the back room, shotgun held casually in the crook of his arm. Outside, Catherine could see Matthew and several of his ranch hands positioned strategically along the boardwalk, watching the store entrance. Pierce assessed the situation with the calculation of a man accustomed to measuring risks against rewards. His gaze swung back to Catherine, cold fury evident beneath his composed exterior. "You think these rustics can protect you?" he asked softly. "I have resources beyond your imagination, Miss Hayes. Men in Denver and Cheyenne, even in this backward territory, who answer to me. This delay changes nothing." "That sounds mighty like threatening a witness under my protection," Sheriff Wilcox commented. "Which is a crime in Wyoming Territory." Pierce's men had begun to filter into the store, creating a tense standoff. The air thickened with potential violence. Catherine's fingers curled around the counter edge, steadying herself. This was the moment of truth, the confrontation she'd been running from for months. Pierce was right about one thing. He had resources she couldn't match, connections that extended far beyond this small town. But what he didn't understand, what she herself had only recently discovered, was that wealth and power weren't the only forms of strength. Sometimes strength came from standing your ground. Sometimes it came from the people who chose to stand with you. "Mr. Pierce," she said clearly, "I have built a life here. These people are my friends, my community. If you continue to pursue me, you'll have to go through them." She straightened her spine. "And through me, I'm done running." A flicker of something, surprise, perhaps even grudging respect, crossed Pierce's face. He studied her for a long moment, then glanced around at the increasingly hostile faces surrounding him. "This isn't over," he said finally. "Actually," came a new voice, "I believe it is." Matthew stepped into the store, his presence commanding despite his youth. In his hand he held a folded document. "What's this?" Pierce demanded. "A telegram from Judge Hamilton in Cheyenne," Matthew replied, extending it toward the sheriff. "Responding to our inquiry about the legal standing of inherited property in cases of debt resolution." Sheriff Wilcox read it quickly, a smile spreading beneath his mustache. "Well, now, ain't that interesting? Judge says that personal heirlooms, particularly those passed through maternal lines, cannot be claimed against a father's debts without specific documented agreement from all parties." He handed the telegram to Pierce, who scanned it with increasing tension in his jaw. "Furthermore," Wilcox continued, "any attempt to seize such property without legal proceeding constitutes theft under territorial law." He hooked his thumbs in his belt again. "So unless you've got documentation showing Miss Hayes specifically offered her mother's diamond as collateral, signed by her, mind you, you've got no claim." The storekeeper shifted his shotgun, making the movement deliberately visible. Outside, more townsfolk had gathered, alerted by some silent signal that something significant was occurring. Pierce's expression cycled through rage, calculation, and finally, reluctant acceptance. He was outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and most unexpectedly outflanked legally. "This backwater will not always protect you," he said to Catherine, his voice low, "and I have a long memory." "So do we," Matthew responded, stepping closer to Catherine. "And unlike Boston, word travels fast out here about men who harass women and threaten peaceful communities." His eyes hardened. "Every ranch, every town from here to Denver will know your name and your business by week's end." "How will that affect your resources?" The implications hung in the air. Pierce's reputation, the very thing that gave him power in business circles, could become a liability in the West where different codes prevailed. For a long moment the outcome balanced on a knife's edge. Then Pierce straightened his jacket with precise movements. "It seems I've been misinformed about the legal standing of my claim," he said coldly. I withdraw my request. For now. Wise decision, Sheriff Wilcox agreed. Now, I believe the afternoon stage to Cheyenne leaves in 30 minutes. I'd consider it a personal favor if you and your men were on it. The tension held for another heartbeat before Pierce inclined his head in frigid acknowledgement. With a sharp gesture to his men, he turned and left the store. Sheriff Wilcox followed them out, clearly intending to escort them to the stage depot. The others in the store began to relax, exchanging relieved glances. Catherine found herself trembling, the full impact of the confrontation hitting her now that it was over. Matthew moved to her side, his hand finding hers out of sight of the others. You did it, he said softly. You stood your ground. We did it, she corrected, looking around at the people who had rallied to her defense, people who barely knew her, yet had chosen to protect her as one of their own. Mrs. Patterson approached, patting Catherine's arm. Well, that was more excitement than we usually see on a Wednesday. How about some tea to settle your nerves, dear? The ordinary kindness, so at odds with the high drama of moments before, nearly undid Catherine completely. She blinked back sudden tears, managing a wobbly smile. Thank you, she said, the words encompassing far more than the offer of tea. Thank you all. The summer sun hung low in the western sky, casting long shadows across Matthew's front porch as they sat side by side in matching rocking chairs. 2 weeks had passed since Pierce's departure, with no sign of further trouble. The telegram from the sheriff in Cheyenne confirming that Pierce and his men had boarded the eastbound train had allowed Catherine to finally believe it might truly be over. Jenkins is talking about selling the ranch, Matthew remarked, breaking the companionable silence. Says his joints can't take another Wyoming winter. Catherine nodded. He mentioned it to me as well. His daughter in California has been asking him to move closer for years. He worries about what will happen to you. She smiled slightly. I told him not to concern himself. I've received 3 job offers this week alone, Mrs. Patterson wants help in the store, the hotel needs someone to manage their dining room, and the school board thinks I'd make a fine teacher's assistant. Matthew's rocker stilled. And which are you considering? None, actually. She turned to face him, gathering her courage. I thought, perhaps, there might be another option. His expression grew very still, attentive in a way that made her heart race. I've been thinking, she continued, about putting down roots, real ones, not just working for someone else. Roots, Matthew repeated, his voice carefully neutral, here in the valley. Catherine nodded, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. If the right opportunity presented itself. The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. In the weeks since their first meeting at dawn, since he'd found her goodbye note and convinced her to stay, something had grown between them. Something neither had put into words, but which had been evident in every shared glance, every brush of hands, every quiet conversation on evenings like this one. Matthew set his rocker in motion again, looking out over his land. The cattle grazed peacefully in the distance, the mountains rose majestically against the darkening sky, and the ranch house behind them, too large for one man alone, stood solid and welcoming. You know, he said finally, running this place by myself has always been a challenge. Too much for one person, really. Is that so? Catherine murmured, her heart beginning to pound. He nodded seriously. A ranch needs more than one pair of hands to truly thrive. Needs a partnership. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. What kind of partnership did you have in mind? Catherine asked, barely above a whisper. Matthew turned to her fully then, his blue eyes intent in the fading light. The permanent kind. With deliberate movements, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the last rays of sunlight with familiar brilliance. The diamond, I retrieved it from the hiding place, he explained, answering her unspoken question. Thought it was time it served its purpose again. Its purpose? Your grandfather gave it to your mother on her wedding day, Matthew reminded her, his voice growing husky. To keep her safe. Understanding dawned. Catherine's breath caught as Matthew slid from his chair to kneel before her. "I'm not a wealthy man like Pierce," he said quietly. "I can't offer mansions or fine carriages, but everything I have, this land, this home, my heart, is yours if you want it." He held up the diamond. "I thought we might have this set in a proper ring. If you'll marry me." Tears blurred Catherine's vision. 5 months ago, she had arrived in this valley alone and afraid, certain that attachment only led to pain. She had tried to leave at dawn, believing that running was her only choice. Now, as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue above, she understood just how wrong she'd been. "Yes," she whispered, reaching for his hands. "Yes, Matthew Quentin, I will marry you." His smile outshone even the diamond as he rose to pull her into his embrace. When his lips found hers, Catherine felt the last of her fears dissolve. Here, in his arms, she had found what she never believed possible on the frontier, not just safety but belonging, not just survival but love. As darkness settled over the Wyoming Territory, Catherine Hayes looked toward the future with clear eyes and an open heart. She had tried to ride out alone at dawn until the cowboy found her goodbye note. And in doing so, she had found her way home. In the years to come, the diamond would indeed be set in a simple gold band that Catherine would wear proudly as Matthew's wife. Their ranch would prosper, their family would grow, and the community that had rallied to protect one of their own would celebrate each milestone with them. And on quiet evenings, they would still sit together on the porch, watching the sun set over the land they both loved, grateful for the dawn that had changed everything, the dawn when she had tried to leave and he had convinced her to stay.